Before we dive into this unforgettable story, if you love heartfelt tales that remind us what humanity truly means, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that moves your soul. In a small, overlooked town at the tail end of a relentless winter, a young man named Elijah navigated the shadowy streets with quiet determination. Barely 18, he was orphaned, carrying the weight of loss on his thin shoulders. His only companion was an old bicycle, weathered and worn but deeply cherished, a legacy from his late mother, now his lifeline in the daily fight to survive. The winter wind sliced through his layers, finding every crack in his coat, slipping behind his collar and chilling him to the bone. The days were shorter now, the sun dipped below the skeletal branches of the trees far too soon, leaving the world cloaked in early dusk. The bus stop at the edge of town, dimly lit by a flickering street lamp, stood empty, save for a solitary figure shrouded in a beige wool coat that had clearly seen better days. Elijah's worn shoes crunched on cracked pavement as he pedaled past, but something about the stillness of the woman caught his attention. Her silver hair escaped a once white bonnet, and her small hands gripped a tattered purse so tightly it looked as though letting go would mean losing a part of herself. Her lips moved softly, whispering fragments of words, numbers and street names that seemed lost to the cold air. The young man slowed, his breath steaming in the icy air, his heart pounding with urgency. He had one last delivery to complete before the clock struck 8. If he failed, the landlord's warning echoed in his mind, the key would no longer open the door to his room, and he would be left homeless in the harsh winter night. Yet, as the wind shifted, carrying the woman's faint and trembling voice over to him, Elijah heard the names, Maple Avenue, and, Bus 12, words scattered like brittle leaves across the pavement. No one else seemed to notice, but he did. Drawn by something deeper than logic, he brought his bicycle to a stop beside her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he asked gently, careful not to startle her. "Are you all right?" Her eyes, clouded but searching, met his with a flicker of recognition and something fragile, hope. "I was trying to get home," she said softly. "But I think I missed the bus. Or maybe it missed me." Elijah's gaze drifted to the small pendant resting on a delicate silver chain around her neck. The back bore an inscription, an address etched with graceful handwriting, Charlotte Winters, 72, Pine Hill Road. His breath caught. Pine Hill Road was far beyond the edge of town, nearly 2 hours away by bicycle, with the road climbing steep and unforgiving. His mind raced, every moment now mattered. He could finish the delivery and keep a roof over his head for another week, or he could help this lost woman find her way home. The softness in her eyes, the way she trusted him without hesitation, stirred something deep within Elijah. The decision was made before he fully understood it himself. "That's a long way, but I'll get you there," he said, his voice steady despite the cold and the pressing hour. Helping her carefully onto the rickety rack behind his bike, he wrapped a spare scarf around the seat, then folded his coat gently over her shoulders. "Hold on tight," he said softly. She chuckled quietly, dazed but grateful. "You remind me of someone, my grandson, I think. He used to wear shoes just like those, always scuffed, always proud." Elijah didn't reply. He simply nodded and began to pedal, the wheels creaking beneath them as they left the glow of the streetlights behind. The sky above shifted from lavender to deep gray, then to the heavy cloak of night. The road twisted and stretched, climbing ever upwards, but Elijah pressed on, each push of the pedals fueled by something more than urgency, a quiet resolve. Behind him, the woman hummed a soft tune, her voice sometimes trailing off, sometimes pausing to ask where they were, only to forget the answer moments later. He answered every time, as if each was a new beginning, almost there, just past the next hill. They passed frost-covered fields, crossed bridges lit only by the pale moonlight, and paused once for her to catch her breath. Elijah used the last dollar in his pocket to buy her a warm cup of tea at a roadside gas station, where she insisted he take the first sip. "You need it more," she said with a tender firmness, her voice reminding him of something long lost. The night was thick around them, folding like a heavy curtain as Elijah pushed forward, the cold biting into his fingers and numbing his legs, yet the resolve in his heart burned steadily. The landscape shifted from the familiar streets to winding country roads, dimly lit by nothing but a reluctant moon. The only sounds were the rhythmic creak of the bicycle and the soft hum of the woman's voice, drifting in and out of the silence like a fragile melody. Finally, after what felt like hours, a wrought iron gate emerged through the shadows, its white paint chipped and dulled by years of neglect. Ivy curled possessively around the iron bars, as though trying to hold the place together against the passage of time. Elijah's muscles ached fiercely, and his hands had long since lost feeling. Still, he raised his knuckles to the heavy gate and knocked firmly, once, twice. A door opened. An elderly man stood framed in the doorway, his face etched with worry and disbelief as his eyes fell on the woman behind Elijah. "Charlotte," he gasped, voice trembling. "Where have you been? We've been calling hospitals, everywhere." Charlotte looked around with a faint, confused smile, blinking as if waking from a dream. "I went for a walk, or maybe a ride," she murmured. The man's expression softened as he turned toward Elijah, gratitude breaking through the fatigue in his eyes. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Please come inside, warm yourself. Let us offer you something to eat. And a ride back, if you'll allow." Elijah shook his head, exhaustion weighing on him but contentment glowing quietly within. "No, thank you," he said. "I should get back before it gets colder." He scribbled his phone number on a torn receipt and handed it to the man. "In case you ever need help," he said quietly. With that, he mounted his bike and began the journey back into the night, unaware that this simple act of kindness had already begun to change the course of his life. The ride home was starkly different, quieter, lonelier. Without Charlotte's soft presence behind him or the small, trusting weight on his back, the cold seemed sharper, the night more vast and empty. The wind picked up, whistling through bare branches and carrying the bitter scent of wood smoke and metal that seemed to settle in the air after 9 o'clock. Every bump on the road jolted through his hands and bones, but Elijah did not complain. By the time he reached the edge of town again, the streetlights had thinned to scattered pinpricks of light, and the warmth from the roadside tea had long since vanished from his fingertips. He coasted the final block to the narrow boarding house where he had stayed, a peeling 2-story building with a porch light that never worked. He leaned his bike against the door and reached for the key in his pocket, only to find the space empty. Confused, he checked again, every pocket, seam, jacket fold. The key was gone. A hollow pang spread through his chest. He knocked softly, hoping the landlord was still awake, but no light flickered inside. He knocked louder, desperate now, but the door remained stubbornly shut. A note, taped to the door, caught his eye. 3 words scrawled in thick black marker, "Past due." Locked. His breath hitched. For a long moment, Elijah stood frozen, the bike still at his side, caught between anger, fear, and disbelief. He said no words, shed no tears. Instead, he turned slowly away, the weight of the night pressing down harder than ever. With aching legs and numb hands, Elijah pedaled away from the only home he'd known, forced into the biting cold without warning. But still, the fire that had sparked when he helped Charlotte flickered quietly inside him, keeping him moving forward. As he passed the back alley of the local corner store, a place where he had sometimes traded a few hours of work for day-old bread, a faint light flickered inside. He knocked once on the side door, and after a moment, it creaked open. Mr. Harris, the store's owner, stood there wrapped in a heavy robe, a steaming mug in hand. The older man looked at Elijah, hollow-eyed and shivering, and sighed deeply. "Missed rent again, huh?" he said gruffly but without cruelty. Elijah shook his head. Mr. Harris looked up at the sky, as if seeking an answer from some higher power, then stepped aside. "Well, the storeroom's dry," he grunted. "There's a cot in the corner. Don't touch the wine crates, and don't freeze on me." Elijah nodded, a quiet "thank you" barely escaping his lips. The storeroom smelled of cardboard and citrus, warmed only by an ancient radiator that groaned under the effort. He pulled the thin blanket around his shoulders and let his body collapse onto the narrow cot. Limbs heavy, chest sore, but heart strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, he did not fear sleep. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Elijah slipped into a deep, exhausted sleep, dreaming not of the locked door behind him, but of the silver pendant, the quiet hum of wheels on gravel, and a voice that whispered, "You remind me of someone I love." The morning arrived with a hesitant quietness, as if the world itself was unsure whether to fully wake. A soft, pale light crept slowly through the dust-speckled window of the storeroom, filtering over Elijah's curled form beneath the thin blanket. The cold from the night still clung stubbornly to the walls, slipping through cracks in the aging frame, wrapping itself around his bones. Yet despite the chill, he did not stir immediately. His body ached in that familiar way that only comes after a long night on a hard, unforgiving surface, limbs heavy, muscles tense. But deeper than the physical exhaustion was a weight lodged in his chest, a heaviness born not from the cold but from the fragile thread upon which his existence balanced. For days, weeks even, Elijah had walked the razor's edge between survival and surrender. When he finally rose, it was with a quiet dignity. No complaints escaped his lips as he folded the blanket with careful hands and tucked it against the wall, as if preserving the last warmth it held. He moved to the front of the store silently, his worn shoes making no sound on the smooth linoleum floor. Mr. Harris was already there, locked into the rhythm of morning, opening the shutters, counting the crates, starting the day's routine like a prayer for consistency. When he noticed Elijah, a grunt was all he offered, a sound weighted with meaning deeper than words. Without speaking, he slid a banana and a lukewarm cup of coffee toward the young man. Elijah accepted the simple gifts with a quiet nod, peeling the banana slowly, savoring the small grace of nourishment. Standing by the window, he watched the town awaken. Steam rose in curling wisps from car hoods, children shuffled along sidewalks clutching their backpacks, and somewhere distant, a dog barked once before falling silent. It was a morning like any other, yet something inside Elijah had shifted. Later that day, an unfamiliar sound disturbed the familiar routine, the soft chime of a doorbell that did not belong to the usual bustle of customers. Elijah looked up from behind the counter to see her again, Charlotte Winters. This time, she was unaccompanied, without the grandeur of a chauffeured car or the trappings of wealth. A wool shawl wrapped neatly around her shoulders, a small leather handbag resting gracefully in the crook of her arm. Her face was kind, her eyes searching the room for him as though she knew exactly where he would be. Elijah straightened instinctively, his hands wiping at his jeans, a quiet gesture to hide his nervousness. She approached with a gentle smile, the warmth in her voice outshining the weak morning light. "I hope you don't mind me coming by again," she said softly. "I've been thinking about you all night." Elijah nodded, unable to find words at first. Charlotte's gaze drifted around the store, then returned to him, her voice lowering as if sharing a secret meant only for the two of them. "I've lived in that big house for a very long time," she began, "and it has never felt as quiet as it did this morning. Not even after my husband passed. Not even after my grandson." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "You remind me of him," she said finally. "His kindness, his eyes, the way he always listened more than he spoke." Elijah looked down at the tips of his fingers, curling slightly against the counter's edge. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of thick stationery, the inked handwriting trembling slightly with age. "This," she said gently, "is not a contract. It's not a deal or an arrangement. It's simply an invitation." She unfolded the letter carefully. "I have a home with too many rooms and too few reasons to keep them closed. I'd like you to stay, just until you find your footing. No strings, only support." Elijah's heart pounded. He stared at the letter, absorbing every word as if it were a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. "There's a modest stipend," she continued. "And if you want to return to school, we'll find a way to make that happen." For a long time, Elijah said nothing. Outside, the world moved slowly, cars drifted by, leaves stirred in a gentle breeze, but inside the small store, something profound had begun. Finally, he looked up, meeting Charlotte's eyes with a steady resolve. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like to come." That afternoon, a sleek black car rolled quietly into town, its polished surface glistening under the soft light of early evening. There was no grandeur or ceremony, just a quiet urgency as the driver parked near the small market where Elijah worked. A tall, lean man stepped out, dressed impeccably in a tailored coat and polished shoes. His presence seemed almost out of place in the modest neighborhood, yet his gaze was calm and purposeful. Holding a slip of paper in his hand, he glanced through the store's window, eyes settling on Elijah with unmistakable recognition. The bell above the door chimed softly as the man entered. "Excuse me," he began, his voice smooth but carrying an unspoken weight, "I'm looking for someone named Elijah." Elijah turned away from the window, his heart suddenly racing. "That's me," he said cautiously, eyes wary. The man's expression softened with relief. "Miss Winters sent me," he explained. "She asked me to find you. She remembers everything and wants to thank you personally." She insisted. Mr. Harris, who had been quietly sipping his morning coffee, paused mid-sip but said nothing. Elijah glanced at the man, then down at the receipt in his hand, the very note he had scribbled hastily the night before. It hadn't been meant for anything more than a lifeline, never imagining it would lead to this moment. The man, introducing himself as Charles, opened the door to the car and gestured invitingly. "She's waiting for you, if you're willing." Elijah hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The thought of returning to that grand house, stepping into a world so far removed from his own, was daunting. He was just a delivery boy with no home, no family, no clear future. "I just wanted to make sure she got home safe," he said quietly, voice steady. "That's all." Charles regarded him thoughtfully, neither offended nor insistent. "And you did," he replied. "But she believes you gave her more than directions. She says you gave her back a part of herself. She'd very much like to say that in person." Elijah looked toward Mr. Harris, who gave a slight shrug, masking concern with indifference. "Go," the older man said simply. "Your ride will be here if you need it." Taking a breath that felt too large for his chest, Elijah nodded and followed Charles out. The drive to Pine Hill Road was surreal. The looming shadows of the trees, so mysterious the night before, now stood like silent guardians, bathed in the clarity of daylight. The twists and hills seemed shorter, the steep climbs less intimidating, yet every detail remained etched vividly in Elijah's memory. When they reached the grand White House, it no longer appeared as a distant monument but as a softened memory, familiar yet transformed by the gentle touch of morning light. Charles led Elijah through a side entrance into a warm room filled with sunlight, old books, and quiet peace. There, seated by the window, was Charlotte Winters, no longer the lost and wandering figure from the night before, but a woman restored. Her eyes sparkled with sharpness, her hair neatly pinned. When she saw Elijah, her face broke into a smile that seemed to lift years from her shoulders. "You," she breathed, voice trembling just enough to reveal its truth. "You brought me home." She reached for his hands, her grip gentle but insistent. "I remember everything," she said. "Every street, every word. You didn't treat me like a stranger. You made me feel safe." Elijah bowed his head, unsure how to respond to praise that felt too grand for the simple kindness he had offered. But Charlotte was not done. Leaning forward, her eyes searching his, she spoke softly. "I don't know your story," she said, "but I want to. And if you don't have a place to go, I would be honored to offer you one here. Not just for a night, but longer, if you will let me." Elijah blinked, caught completely off guard by the generosity. It was more than generous. Yet something inside him resisted. Taking a step back, voice low but steady, he replied, "That's kind of you, truly. But I didn't do this to get anything. I just wanted you to be safe, that's all." Charlotte's gaze did not waver. "And that," she said softly, "is exactly why I want you to stay." The silence between them stretched, gentle, uncertain, filled with something neither could yet name. Though Elijah returned to the market that night, to the same cold storeroom, and the same old routine, something inside had shifted. He had been seen. Not for what he lacked, but for the quiet strength he carried, the steady light of a soul who showed up even when no one was watching. Far from that sunlit room, Charlotte sat by her kitchen window, a heart less alone. In her lap rested the coat she wore that night. In her hand, a torn receipt, the number scrawled in uneven blue ink. Whispering his name like a prayer, it was the first warm word she had spoken in years. The dawn crept over the horizon with a fragile gentleness, a soft golden hue filtering through the faded curtains of the small storeroom behind the corner market. Elijah stirred slowly, the aches from the previous night's cold journey still lingering in his muscles, yet there was an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. It was the kind of quiet hope that begins as a whisper before growing stronger with each passing day. He rose carefully, folding the thin blanket with a practiced reverence, as if preserving the faint warmth it still held. Every movement was slow, deliberate, a contrast to the restless nights he had become all too accustomed to. Behind the counter, Mr. Harris began his morning routine, the old man's steady presence a comforting anchor in Elijah's turbulent life. Without a word, he slid a half-warmed cup of coffee and a banana across the counter. Elijah accepted the humble offerings with a quiet nod, peeling the banana slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. Outside, the town was waking. Steam rose gently from parked cars, children shuffled down sidewalks clutching worn backpacks, and somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barked once before silence fell again. Yet this morning was different. Elijah felt it deep within him, the world was shifting, just as he was. Later that day, a soft chime echoed through the store's modest walls. Elijah looked up from his work to see her, Charlotte Winters, walking inside alone, without a driver or the finery that had surrounded her the night before. She wore a simple wool shawl, her leather handbag tucked neatly in the crook of her arm, and a warmth in her eyes that reached out to him. Their eyes met, and Elijah straightened, wiping his hands nervously on his jeans. Charlotte approached with a gentle smile, her voice soft and filled with kindness. "I hope you don't mind me coming back," she said, "I couldn't stop thinking about you last night." Elijah nodded, unable to find words at first, the weight of her attention both surprising and comforting. Charlotte's gaze swept the store before settling back on him, her voice lowering to a private whisper. "I've lived in that house for many years," she began, "and never has it felt so empty, so quiet, as it did this morning. Not even after my husband passed. Not even after my grandson." She paused, drawing a deep breath that trembled with memories. "You remind me of him," she said softly. "His kindness, the way he listened more than he spoke." Elijah looked down at his hands, fingers curling gently on the edge of the counter, the words stirring something tender inside. From her bag, Charlotte withdrew a piece of thick stationery, the ink slightly trembling with age. Unfolding it carefully, she said, "This is not a contract, not a deal or obligation, just an invitation." Her eyes met his, earnest and steady. "I have a home with too many rooms and not enough reasons to keep them closed. I want you to stay here, just until you find your footing. No strings attached. There's a modest stipend, and if you want to go back to school, we'll help you with that." Elijah absorbed every word, the offer sinking deep like a lifeline tossed into turbulent seas. For a long moment, he said nothing. The world outside moved on, cars drifted by, leaves fluttered in a soft breeze, but inside the small store, something profound had begun. Finally, lifting his gaze, Elijah met Charlotte's eyes with newfound resolve. "I'd like that," he whispered. "I'd like to come." That afternoon, the sleek black car appeared again, sliding quietly into the modest neighborhood with the unspoken promise of change. The scent of pine lingered faintly within, mingling with the fresh hope that seemed to accompany it. Elijah packed the few belongings he owned into a worn backpack, the familiar weight a quiet reminder of how far he had come and how far he had yet to go. Saying goodbye to Mr. Harris, the kind but stoic store owner, Elijah accepted a brown paper bag filled with sandwiches, a small gift wrapped in quiet understanding. "About time," Mr. Harris muttered, giving a rare, wry smile. The ride to Pine Hill Manor was surreal. The winding roads, so daunting in the dark, now seemed welcoming beneath the soft glow of daylight. The towering trees that had once loomed like shadows now stood as silent sentinels guarding a world that felt both strange and inviting. Arriving at the grand White House, Elijah stepped inside through a side door. The warmth of sunlight spilled across the polished floors, mixing with the scent of old books and quiet comfort. Charlotte was there, seated by a window where golden light softened the edges of her face. Her hair was pinned neatly, her eyes sharp and clear, a stark contrast to the fragile woman he had helped the night before. When their eyes met, her smile blossomed, carrying with it the weight of gratitude and new beginnings. "You," she whispered, voice trembling just enough to reveal the truth beneath. "You brought me home." Her hands reached out, gripping his with gentle insistence. "I remember everything, every street, every word. You didn't treat me like a stranger. You made me feel safe." Elijah bowed his head, humbled by praise that seemed too grand for such a simple act. But Charlotte's words continued, earnest and heartfelt. "I don't know your story, but I want to. And if you have nowhere else to go, I would be honored to offer you a place here. Not just for tonight, but for as long as you need." Elijah hesitated, the offer both overwhelming and humbling. "I didn't do this for anything in return," he said softly. "I just wanted you to be safe." Charlotte's gaze held steady, unwavering. "That's exactly why I want you to stay." A silence stretched between them, gentle, tentative, filled with the promise of something new. Though Elijah returned to the market that night, to the same cold storeroom and worn routine, inside, something had shifted irrevocably. He had been truly seen. Not for what he lacked, but for the quiet strength he carried, the steady light of someone who showed up even when no one was watching. And far from the sunlit room, Charlotte sat by her kitchen window, her heart lighter than it had been in years. In her lap rested the coat she wore that night. In her hand, a torn receipt scrawled with a number in uneven blue ink. Whispering Elijah's name like a prayer, it was the first warm word she had spoken in a long, long time. Days turned into weeks as Elijah settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and comforting. Life at Pine Hill Manor was not lavish, it was peaceful. He was given a modest room with sunlight spilling through tall windows, overlooking a garden that bloomed quietly under the changing seasons. The gentle routine, morning walks through the greenhouse with Charlotte, long conversations over steaming cups of tea, weekends filled with ideas and plans, became a balm to a soul long wearied by hardship. With Charlotte's quiet encouragement, Elijah began to imagine a future beyond survival. Together, they founded a small foundation, the Willow Light Fund, named for the street that had once seemed lost and the kindness that would never be forgotten. Its mission was simple but profound, to support young people with potential but no path, to provide shelter to the elderly who had slipped through society's cracks, and to remind everyone listening that dignity and care are not privileges but birthrights. Elijah threw himself into this new purpose with a fierce dedication. He helped design the first programs, met with counselors, and worked part-time at the community center the foundation renovated. Each step forward was a testament to what a single act of grace could grow into when offered without expectation. And still, from time to time, Elijah rode his old bicycle into town, not out of necessity, but to remember where he had come from, and what it meant to truly be seen. Passing by the bus stop where it all began, he would slow down slightly, tip his head toward the sky, and smile. Because sometimes, you don't find home, it finds you. Sometimes, all it takes to change the course of a life is the willingness to stop, to truly see someone, and to ride a little farther than you planned. Thank you for following this story with me. If this tale has touched your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that celebrate the power of kindness, resilience, and human connection. Join us and be part of a community that believes in the beauty of compassion.